In today's show, I'm going to look at a Sony SLV R1000 that was shipped up all the way from Texas to Vancouver, BC to be repaired because apparently the people down there don't seem to know what they are doing, at least according to the client, who also happens to be a viewer. So this machine would not load a tape. It's got a mechanical problem. Let's take a look and see what the problem is. Many might wonder why somebody would send a VHS machine all the way to Canada to be repaired, and this particular machine is what's called a Super VHS machine. Now, if you've recorded tapes in the Super VHS format, you need a Super VHS machine to play the tapes back. It won't play on a conventional machine, and these machines are actually getting quite rare, and they're demanding quite a high price on the used market. So if you've got a Super VHS machine, it's certainly worth the time and effort to try and get it repaired, because otherwise you can't play your tapes. It's like having an obsolete beta machine. Okay, on this SLV R1000, it was shipped in for repair. As you can see, the P3 guide is floating free, and that's most certainly going to be one of the blue loading gears, which I just happen to have. That's why this machine was shipped in. We're going to pull a mechanism on this. I'm going to replace the loading gear and get this nice old SLV R1000, which is a Super VHS machine. We're going to get this one back up and running. We're also going to lubricate the normal problems on these units, like the pinch arm assembly that gets gummed up and will eventually seize up and break the plastic arm here. And we'll also lubricate. Well, this one's actually not sticking on here, but I think we'll probably take this off and lubricate it while we're at it. Anyway, that's where we're at. We have to pull the mechanism out to get below to change this gear. To pull the mechanism, we have to start by removing the front panel. So there's some clips just on either side and on the top here, and we can release these clips and the front panel should just lift off. Oh, I just heard something rattling around inside. It's probably broken pieces from that gear. We're just releasing the plastic clips here so that I can pop the front off. That makes removing front panel comes off like that. That makes removing the mechanism a little bit easier. So we need to remove all the screws here that are marked with an arrow on this board here. I've got the machine turned around, obviously. This is the board on the left side. This is the video board. We have to remove the screws on the top, and there's two black screws in the back where the video input-output and the S-video connectors are. They have to come out as well. This board has to be lifted out of the way just to make clearance so that it makes it just a little bit easier to get at the mechanism. And I guess in theory it might be possible to do it without removing this, but it just makes it that much easier if you swing the board out of the way. So we're going to remove all these screws here, lift the board out, and then we're able to access the mechanism. And we're going to actually lift the entire deck. So we're going to take the front loading mechanism out and then lift the deck out so that it can be worked on out of the unit. one more catch back here. I think this whole mechanism should now lift out of the chassis. Okay, that should be it. There's a big disconnect. Should be some connectors there I gotta undo. Undo the two connectors here on the side. And the chassis should, I think, lift out now. There might be one more screw I gotta take out back here. There is one more screw right at the back there. It's a ground screw. Now, the mechanism should fairly easily lift out. Unplug the erase head and unplug the audio head. The audio head out. Okay, now we've got the standard mechanism. Now we can take this part apart. I can get the main chassis out of the way and I can work on the deck. So we'll lift the main chassis all the way and set it aside. As you can see, these SLV R1000, there's the piece of the broken gear that fell out. The blue gear is broken. This is the new one that we're going to put in. As you can see, these units here are a little more work than some of them because you actually have to remove the actual mechanism in order to work on it. And that requires also undoing these two plugs. One of them has got a piece of tape over it, which makes it kind of hard to take apart unless you actually cut that tape. Okay, now you can put the mechanism upside down and see what I got to do here to change the broken gear. So we're going to remove the screws here that hold the board in place. They're all marked with an arrow. Five screws are released. You can now release the circuit board. The circuit board will lift out. And here's our broken gear that we need to change. To change that broken gear, we have to remove the main cam gear. Now the timing on this is all going to be correct because it's only this gear that's broken. So nothing else on this is out of alignment. So we're going to remove the cut washers here. So we're just going to pick them off. Lift off the retainer plate. Lift off the cam gear, and I'm going to hold the rest of the mechanism so that it doesn't slide when I do this. Just pop it out like that. Okay. Cam gear is not broken, so I can put that back in when I'm done. Now I need to basically move the guide forward so that I can get at the broken gear. We're going to remove this other cut washer. I got to take this guide assembly apart. So to do that, so I'm just going to remove these two cut washers here so that I can remove the guides themselves and the whole entire mechanism, or the arm. Need something that's flat. To pop it up. There's one. Put that one there. Now when I do that, this actual guide will actually come right out like that. And I'll do the same for the other guide over here. I'll remove this other one as well. put that other cut washer separate. So this is my right side guide, so we'll just set that. Again, I'm keeping these separated so that I know which side they go in. So I've got the left side guide and the right side guide. Now I can lift this timing gear out completely, and I can remove the broken pieces and the broken arm and the broken gear. So there's our broken gear. Now we're going to change the gear. Now the gear, as you can see, it just split in two. The reason why is there's a spring on there. So we're going to take the broken gear off, and I do that just by rotating it to the access cutout, and then I can just lift it off. Like that. I take my spring. The new gear is exactly the same. Here's the piece here. That's the piece of the gear. That's the way it goes. You can see the alignment holes. The spring lifts off, and it goes right into the new gear, just like it lifted off the other one, just like that. Now, this piece goes back on here, and we actually have to latch it in behind the spring here. The spring's going to go in behind this little hook. So we have to get that little hook in there, get the gear in place, and then turn the gear, and while pressing it down, we're going to get to the little cutout here and pop it in like that, and that is how the gear sits. That's the new gear on the arm. That's as simple as it is. Now it's just a point of reassembling the mechanism. So we go back, we put the gear on, and drop it in place. Push it down, it'll pop into place just like that. There's the new gear, and we take the other gear. We take the other gear and we drop it in place too. We have to do the timing on this. We're going to put the gears in before we put the in the guides. So I'm going to turn the guides up all the way to their fully extended position, and when they're in their fully extended position, these two holes you'll see line up right here. This piece lines up with that hole. Drop them down together. And the two will mesh. I'm off by a little bit here, so I'm just going to go one more tooth. It's got to kind of turn it so I can see it. There we go. Now when I bring these back, they will slide down and go in place like that. And our holes will line up. There's a hole that lines up right here that looks right through the chassis there, and then this piece lines up with that hole there. So now we know that our guides are aligned, our arms are aligned. Now we can take these back and we can put our guide posts back in place. I'm going to put the cut washers back on here to keep these from, oh, those aren't the right cut washers, those are the ones for the guides, these ones. I'm going to put the cut washers back on to hold the guide posts in place, or the timing gears in place, so that they don't drop out when I turn the chassis over. Now I'm going to turn the chassis over, and I'm going to reinstall the guides. So here's one guide. Now remember, this guide, when you're pulling the, when you pull the guide back, this has to be pulled in before. But we're going to put the guide in place. The guide just drops in, just like that, with the bottom pin going through the hole. You got to hold it up while you do it. Then we can turn it back over while holding the guide in from below. Put the cut washer back on. That's one. Turn it back over. Get the other guide. Same thing. Hold the mechanism in place from below. Hold the arm in place. Drop the guide in. Like that. Turn it over. Hold it in place. While holding it in place, put the cut washer back on. And that's it. The guides are now timed. They will move together. We bring the guides back to the resting position. Make sure that you have the tension arm pulled into place like this. Now we can put the main cam gear back on. Now remember, this other mechanism has not moved. I haven't moved anything, so this is all going to be correct. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that our alignment holes here for these levers are lining up with the holes below. As you can see, directly below here, you can see the alignment of those. We're going to take the cam gear, we're going to pull these guides back, and we're going to take the cam gear and we're going to put it on. And when we put the cam gear on, we should be able to see down through these holes. We should be able to see the alignment pins. So you can, if you see down through here, you'll see a peg here, here, and here. These pegs are these guides. So when you see the 3 pegs, you push the pin back down, and it should drop into place. We may have to wiggle one of these here just to make it go and drop into place. But as long as your timing is correct, it will drop into place. Just like that. Now our alignment is done. We can now put the main keeper back on, and it goes on like, where was it here? I think I put one of these extra, goes on like that. I got to pull this one off to do that, because that just holds it in place until we put the plate back on. And now we can put our cut washers back on. Our 3 cut washers. Put our 3 cut washers back on, and now the mechanism is repaired. If I turn the cam gear here, or turn the loading motor I should say, the cam gear will turn and the teeth will engage, and this will drive the guides into place just like that. And if I continue to turn it, we'll run it through its paces. As you can see, the guides are moving now. The tape would be threading. If I turn it over so you guys can see, here's the mechanism. You can see the P5 guide is pulling into place. Or actually that's the P6, because this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is the way that they number them. Anyway, pinch roller is dropping, as you can see on the right side here, or the top of the screen. Pinch roller is dropping as the tape is threading. Capstan motor, you'll see that the pinch roller is actually turning. If I spin it here. Unthreading the mechanism is exactly the same, well, it's the opposite, so if we turn it the opposite direction, we'll see the pinch roller disengages. The brakes release here so that the tape can wind back into the shell. There goes the brake off. Now the brake is on the take-up side. The brake is off on the supply side, because this is the one that's going to wind the tape back in as the guides start to retract. Pinch roller starts to lift. If you look on the pinch roller side, the pinch arm here is starting to lift. As the pinch roller clears the capstan shaft, the guides will now start to move back, which they are. Here go the 2 guides. Note that the back tension arm is not retracting. This should be moving in to the left now, so it'll clear the guide. What's going to happen is the guide is actually going to hit and it's going to jam. You see, and that's what caused that gear to break in the first place. You see, what's happened here is this little arm is supposed to kick back, and I bet you there's a little tab that's broken off of right down here. I bet you that little arm is broken. Bet you, that little arm is broken. And that is why this thing broke, because the guide hit against, this is supposed to pull in. This is the back tension arm. This is supposed to pull in. And I bet you, when I pop this little spring off here and take this little guide out, I bet you there's going to be a little piece of plastic on the bottom of this that's broken. What do you think the chances of that are? We'll just pop that off. Oh, yes. Yeah, that's what I think the problem is. There's a piece that's broken, and I bet you that piece that's broken is this little piece that's fallen out of the chassis right here. That little pin, that little piece fell out. Okay, I gotta find a new one of these arms. So this piece that's broken is called the back tension brake, or sometimes called the P1 guide. And as I say, there's a pin that's missing off of the bottom here. And well, this is what a normal one looks like. As you can see, the two of them side by side. This plastic pin is missing from this one. What happens on these machines is this plastic pin can break. And quite often, if people put wet cleaning tapes in, those Allsop cleaners were notorious for breaking plastic parts. I'm not saying that's what happened on this, but that happened on a lot of them. So it would break the plastic lever here, and then the guide would not retract back in before the main mechanism started to unload, and it would jam and it would cause it to break, and the motor would keep turning, and you'd end up with a broken blue gear. So let's put this new one in place. It just drops in place like that. And I have to make sure that I get this on the right. There's a lever down here, and this has got to be on the correct side of that lever, or it's not going to pull it in. So I'm going to pull it back like this and drop it in there like that. Push it in place. Like that. Put the clip, put the spring back on, and then I'm going to wind the brake tension arm around and lock it in place. It locks in right here. And that just snaps in like that. And then this cover just drops back on there like that. Okay, now I can continue with the load and unload. So we'll reload this thing just to make sure that it is going to pull the guide back as it's supposed to. So we'll drive the guide forward again. Now watch what happens in here when it's going forward. It should, there we go. See, now that moving in place. If you watched it from before, it would have snapped in place when I was loading it. It would have followed the guide, and when the guide released, it would have snapped into place. Okay, now that I rewind it, unload it, you'll see the P1 guide pulls out of the way first and pauses. And the loading cycle, or the unloading cycle, continues. And then the brakes go on. And I believe that's the end of the cycle. So now we're back to home with all the alignment holes are now all lined up. Since we've got this machine apart, it wouldn't make any sense to not clean the mode switch, which is the mode encoder over here, rotary encoder switch. So we'll just take the rotary encoder switch out and we'll give it a shot of cleaner, because this machine is a fair bit of work to tear this thing down to do these type of repairs on this. Okay, there's my mode switch out. You notice that my little arrow here is pointing right against the timing mark here. That's the home position. And there's another little indentation right there where my fingernail is. And that one, if the camera will focus, that's what points at that little marker there. So let's just pop this apart by squeezing the pins down, and we'll see that this is ugly. Let's get some good old contact cleaner on this thing. I'm going to use Deoxit D100L, which is the liquid, the pure liquid, and we're just going to wipe it clean. Okay, for you skeptics out there that wonder how well this works, watch this. Look at it. It just, those contacts went from black to shiny silver with just one wipe, and this stuff is incredible. You know, easily the best cleaner that I've used in, you know, since the early days of Neutral.
Came out of this thing just a bit.
Like, Neutral used to be a very good cleaner back in the 70s and 80s when they used some very harsh chemicals for solvents, but the more recent stuff is not that good because it's alcohol based. But this stuff is actually the real deal, and every time I use Deoxit on product, and I'm endorsing this because I think this stuff is fantastic. Every time I use Deoxit D100 or D5, it just does such a wonderful job of cleaning. And you know, there'll be the naysayers out there that'll probably thumbs me down for this, but you know, seeing is believing, and this stuff actually works really well.
We'll put a little more on here just to leave inside the switch so that it keeps it clean. And we'll put the switch back together and rotate several times to work the cleaner in. So this is the perfect use for the Deoxit D100 in the needle dropper bottle, when you can take a switch apart. You don't need to spray, and the spray works great for when you're getting into controls and stuff, but if you're taking a switch apart to clean it, this stuff actually works really good, and you don't waste it. A couple drops is all you need. Okay, realign the switch back to its home position, which is right there, and now we're going to put the mechanism. I got dirt that came out of that. That's bad news for a switch when you get a switch that's that dirty. I'm going to drop this back in like that, and I just have to pull this lever forward a little bit to the left so that it drops into place. And now, make sure that my holes are lined up, which they are. There's a, I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but there's a hole. There's a little mark right there, little hole, and it lines up with that arrow. Line those up and you are good to go. I'm going to clean the contacts on the back here as well, as I see that they are quite badly tarnished. They are silver contacts that make connection with the circuit board that sits over top of this. So we'll just put a drop of cleaner in here. And we'll wipe these contacts clean as well. As you can see, these contacts have come back to silver. Okay, all clean. Now it's time to reinstall the circuit board. Those contacts, incidentally, they are what connect to here. That's what connects with the encoder switch. So we put the tape sensor back down through the hole in the middle, and everything should just pop into place. All the plugs line up, snap it into place, reinstall the plug for the drum motor, which is over here. We'll do that before we put the board in. It's CN9. We'll just plug that one back in. Route the wire around the back side here. Okay, now the 5 screws. Now it's time to mount the chassis again into the rest of the machine. So we'll just set it aside. I'll go get the rest of the chassis. Chassis just drops in place. A bit of coaxing, the chassis will line up. There's a plastic pin that goes through here, and then we've got our 2 chassis holders that hold the mechanism down. There's one. The other one is right over here. Been so long since I've actually taken one of these apart. I forgot how much work there was to the this design. They call this the mid chassis design. I don't know, what do they think? It's a race car or something? But I forgot how much work was involved to actually change the gear. The gear is easy to change, but this one here you gotta really take the thing apart to get at it. There are wires in behind there. Okay, that's in place. There's one ground screw that goes back here that grounds this little tab. That one. We'll reconnect the video head to the preamp. That's this edge connector here, and it just plugs in. Like that.
have two more connectors down here that have to be connected to put power to the little circuit board on the bottom. Okay, next is the front loader. The front loader, it just drops in place like that. There's a couple screws that hold it in place. Should be four, two black screws and two silver screws. Reconnect the power connector for the loading motor and reconnect the full erase head. Now we can put the audio video board back in place. This is actually the video board. Snap that down. When I see something cool on these machines, this is the only VCR that I know of that uses a fluorescent light as the backlight. Cool, huh? There might have been others, but this is one that I remember that it has a fluorescent tube. It actually has a full fluorescent tube. That's why there's a cover on this side here, because this is there's a high voltage generator over here, right underneath this shield cover. There's high voltage across this tube, so one side's exposed, but the other side, this would be the grounded side more likely. This side's going to have the high voltage on it to light that tube up. So I always thought that was kind of cool on these machines. Let's get the front cover on it so that I can test it. So I guess everyone's wondering, is this thing going to work or not? And I think the person who wonders most about this is the fellow down in that sent it to me in Webster, Texas, to say this was sent up to me and he actually ordered a second gear, so I've got another gear for him to send back in case it ever breaks again. But hopefully it won't, because, as I say, this is what caused it. Let's see if this thing works. So power on, and it says, please set the clock. I've got it plugged into my TV. I guess you can hear that. It's playing a tape in Super VHS. I can't show that for more than a couple seconds there, but hey, it's working. We'll clean this machine. And I think I'll lubricate the pinch arm assembly, because it hasn't failed on here yet, but this is a problem spot. This arm gets gummed up and will eventually cause this to jam, and when it does, it will break. So to prevent that, I'm just going to remove this screw here so that I can remove the bracket. I've got the power off on this, by the way, and then we can lift the pinch arm off. And we can clean up. Oh, there's no lubricant at all on there. Well, that's not good. Well, let's put some molly coat on there. We get some. I have a stash. But we never ever get this stuff again. This stuff all came from Mitsubishi back when I used to have to change like literally hundreds of their pinch arms, because they would break, just like the Sony ones. They would gum up and break, and they always used to put a little pack of this in so that we could do the chassis. And I would keep it, because I would never use the whole tube, right? Like every pinch arm kit came with a pack of this grease, this PG 641 grease molly coat, and I would keep it because, well, you never know when it's going to come in handy, right? So I would always keep what I didn't use, just for times like this when I had VCRs that I had to repair. So I'll put some of this, you don't need much. Just a little bit of this on the shaft post, and we'll put a bit more down here on the gear, on the tower gear. And then we'll put the pinch arm back in place because that's completely dry, that. Now if you're doing this, be careful not to lift up this gear because it is timed. So if you lift it up, you're going to knock the alignment out. So just carefully lubricate it and put the top back on. This goes in place just like that and drops in place like that to hold it in place. This bracket is actually dual purpose. One, it holds the gears in place, but it's also what opens the tape up. When you put the tape in, the tape actually hits up against this, and that's what opens the lid on the tape. Now once you do this, what you want to do is you want to go and you want to just clean off, because the grease will smear around, it will squish. So you just want to go in there and you want to clean off any excess. Because what will happen is if you get too much grease in there, when the pinch arm goes down for the first time, if you get too much grease out of there, when you go into fast forward or rewind and the tape jumps a bit off of the guide, it could make contact with the grease and you could contaminate your tape, and then it's going to clog your head. So any excess that spreads out around the plastic pinch arm here, you got to make sure that you wipe that clear, just so that it doesn't cause a problem and contaminate your tape. There we go. Now that is clean. Another trouble spot on these units is the grease on the P5 guide, which is this one here, does have a tendency to gum up. Now it hasn't happened on this one. This one here is completely free. So what I can do on this, I could take it off and clean it and replace the grease or oil, but it hasn't. In this case, it hasn't gummed up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a drop of oil. I can push this down and just put a drop of oil in here so that it can actually work its way into that guide. And that'll prevent it from gumming up in the future. So I'm just going to grab my 3-in-1 oil. And again, we're going to wipe up any excess as well, right? Because we don't want any extra oil getting into the mechanism where we don't want it. So I'm just going to maybe put a bit of it on the end of put a drop on the end of my dental pick and just get oil down into that bearing. That's it. That's how you lubricate it. Now I never have to worry about that gumming up because it has some fresh oil. So it'll be good for many years. Time to clean the heads. Best way to do it is just take a piece of writing paper, wet it with alcohol, hold it up against the drum, and turn counterclockwise. That's the best way to clean VCR heads. And that is the way that the pros all did it. Sure, some might try to sell you cleaning sticks, chamois, whatever. Best way, piece of paper. Use Q-tip for your audio heads, your control head, and the other guides and so forth. there we go. That is clean. Let the alcohol evaporate. We'll give the machine one last test. Now you might wonder why I haven't bothered to do tape path alignment on this. I guess I could check it, but really it won't be off because I didn't turn any of the guides. Everything is still tight. Nothing is loose. The guides have not turned. So the tape path alignment will not be incorrect on this unit. Had these guides come loose and started to rotate, then yes, we would have to do a tape path alignment. But as you saw, when I played a tape, this was the tape recorded in EP. It's just got a couple of movies on it. That was actually Problem Child. Should go and play Pump Up the Volume. I might actually sit and watch that. That was a funny movie if you ever saw that one. About the kid, the radio pirate kid. This was recorded off Laserdisc, so I might actually sit down and watch that because I am going to test this machine for a while this evening before I put it all together and send it on its way. It's got a long trip home, so I want to make sure everything's perfect on here before I fire it up and send it back. But there won't be an alignment problem because I played a tape, this tape, and this tape was recorded on my machine probably 20 odd years ago, and it plays perfectly. So there is no alignment issue whatsoever on this machine. And this tape's recorded in the EP speed. So if it's going to play a tape recorded on my machine in EP perfectly without any tracking lines or anything, there's not an issue with the alignment on here, so I'm not going to touch it. There you go. It's fixed. Back together. Well, it's got to put the top on it. Unit is fixed. Sony SLV R1000. That was replacing the broken blue gear. There's another spare that's going to go back with this. I'm going to put this in the box and send it back as a spare because the guy that owns this asked me to get him a spare. So he's going to have a spare. That goes back in his box. Ready to ship. I'll even send him back the broken piece so he can have a souvenir. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video real soon. Bye for now.